There are wars the Imperium remembers, and there are wars it quietly buries. Some worlds fall not in fire, but in silence, their names struck from the data archives as if they never existed. Yet, for those who fought and bled there, the silence is worse than death itself. Imagine a regiment of the Astra Militarum, millions strong, abandoned at the edge of the galaxy, cut off from supply, from command, from faith itself. No reinforcements, no evacuation, no Vox contact, only the endless dusk of a dying sun, and the whisper of something ancient stirring beneath the soil. They say soldiers of the Imperium fight for glory, for duty, for the Emperor's light. But what happens when that light fades? When the banners are torn, the rations gone, and even the chaplain's sermons ring hollow beneath a red sky? What remains when the greatest army in the galaxy discovers that hope itself has fled the battlefield? If the idea of witnessing the Imperium's bravest stand against despair itself draws you in, stay with us until the end. And if you find value in these stories, tales of devotion, ruin, and impossible endurance, honor this channel as you would the Emperor, with a like, a share, and a subscription, so that these forgotten voices are never silenced again. They said the deployment orders came sealed with the sigil of the Munitorum, stamped in wax and blessed by a priest whose name none of them remembered. No explanation was given. The coordinates were strange. A star system long believed barren, uninhabited, forgotten by both chart and record. Yet the order was clear. Embark immediately, no questions, no hesitation. The 812th Cadian Expeditionary Regiment obeyed, as the Astra Militarum always does, their transports ascending through the smog of a dying world toward a destination no one could name. The journey took 3 standard months through the void, 3 months of drills, recitations, and the murmured prayers of soldiers too young to understand what awaited them. In the mess halls, the talk grew uneasy. The navigators whispered of a flicker in the Astronomicon, a distortion that bent even the Emperor's light. Some claimed they heard voices through the hull, faint echoes reverberating like wind over metal. But discipline held. Orders were orders, and faith was not to be questioned. When the fleet finally emerged from the warp, they found themselves adrift beneath a blood-colored sun. The world below was cloaked in gray, its atmosphere veined with lightning and ash. No Vox response came from the surface. The Auspex readings were useless, static interference, anomalies that shifted from moment to moment. The planet had no name in any data archive. So the commander, Colonel Renar Voss, gave it one. Gathis-IX, a name born of necessity, uttered in defiance of the void's silence. The descent began at dawn, though on Gathis-IX dawn had no color. The skies were a permanent pall of smoke and metallic dust. Landers bucked in the turbulence, engines screaming as they fought the planet's twisted gravity. Whole drop detachments vanished into the clouds, their signals never reaching the ground. Those who survived the descent found themselves on a plain of fractured stone, stretching endlessly toward a horizon that shimmered with heat despite the cold. The air tasted like rust. Even through rebreathers, the soldiers coughed up black phlegm after minutes of exposure. Rations were distributed. Defensive perimeters were erected. The Vox officers tried again and again to establish contact with orbit, but every transmission dissolved into hissing static. By nightfall, only one transport had successfully reached them, the Vigilance Cry, a Valkyrie squadron that had lost half its complement to atmospheric storms. Its pilot swore she'd seen shapes moving within the clouds, vast and slow, as if the air itself had a pulse. No one slept that first night. The soldiers of the 812th were veterans, men and women who had fought across the segmentum, from hive sieges to demon incursions, but nothing in their experience had prepared them for the silence of Gathis-IX. There were no birds, no wind, no sound at all save for the faint hum of machinery and the crackle of Lasgun power packs warming in the cold. Even footsteps seemed to vanish too quickly, swallowed by the dust. The planet felt hollow, as if it were listening. Colonel Voss ordered patrols to fan out from the landing zone, seeking evidence of the supposed rebellion they had been sent to suppress. None returned. At first they assumed they were lost in the ash storms, disoriented by faulty compasses. Then, when the third and fourth patrols vanished without trace, the colonel ordered the perimeter doubled and all men to carry full munitions at all times. The priest assigned to the regiment, Father Cauldron, claimed the planet was cursed. He spoke of the Emperor's wrath upon worlds that turned from his light, of penance, of redemption through suffering. Few listened. The men respected him, but superstition was a fragile shield against the unease seeping into their minds. Some claimed to hear whispers in the static. Others reported seeing motion at the edge of vision, figures that dissolved when approached, shadows that seemed to breathe. On the fifth day, the ground itself shifted. It was subtle at first, a tremor, a low vibration that rippled through the camp's foundations. The engineers assumed it was geological instability, perhaps a tectonic fault line beneath the surface. But when they drove a seismic probe into the ground, the readings returned impossible results. There was no crust, no mantle, no core. Just layers of hollow strata and something beneath them that moved, slowly and deliberately, like a living thing buried under stone. That night, the first of the regiment went missing from within the camp itself. Private Lauren, a sentry assigned to perimeter watch, simply vanished from his post. His lost gun lay abandoned in the dust, power cell still warm. The sand around his boots showed no sign of struggle, no blood, no tracks. It was as if he had been lifted from the ground without disturbing a grain. Searchlights swept the horizon, but the fog was too thick, the light scattering into useless halos. The men muttered prayers under their breath. By morning, 2 more were gone. Commissar Thane demanded an immediate head count, his voice echoing across the assembly lines. His face was pale, his power sword unsheathed. "Desertion," he declared, though his tone betrayed no conviction. He ordered the remaining troops to gather, to kneel, to recite the catechism of the Emperor's enduring vigil. The soldiers obeyed, but their voices were thin, hollow, and uncertain. Colonel Voss argued against summary executions, urging calm. The commissar disagreed. 3 men were executed that day for supposed dereliction of duty. Their bodies were burned at dusk. The smoke carried upward into the gray clouds that did not move. The soldiers watched in silence, their eyes reflecting the flames. That night, the ground trembled again. The tremors came like the beating of a buried heart. Each pulse shuddered through the encampment, rattling armor, making lost guns hum with phantom charge. The Medicae tents swayed on their poles. Data slates flickered, showing strings of symbols no one could read. It was as though the planet itself was trying to speak, and the vox static was its voice. At first, the officers tried to rationalize it. They blamed the warp storms, or magnetic distortion, or equipment malfunction. But when the tremors intensified and the soil began to glow faintly beneath their boots, a dim phosphorescence spreading outward like veins of light, rationality collapsed into dread. The light pulsed in rhythm with the tremors, and every time it did, the Auspex readings spiked off the scale. Sergeant Mara Delaine, veteran of the Ghoul Stars campaign, was the first to act. She ordered her platoon to dig in, to fortify the outer defenses with sandbags and field barriers. Her orders were sharp, disciplined. Her voice steady even as fear clawed at her throat. The soldiers followed her lead, grateful for something to do, for any illusion of control. But as they drove the stakes of the barriers into the soil, each impact made the ground shiver, as if it resented the intrusion. Then came the wind. It began without warning, a low moan that rose from nowhere and everywhere at once. The banners of the Imperium, once limp in the still air, now whipped violently as ash and dust filled the sky. The storm that followed was like nothing any guardsman had ever seen. It wasn't a storm of weather, it was alive. The wind carried whispers, indistinct but urgent, and the ash moved in patterns that almost resembled shapes. Men swore they saw faces in the clouds, eyes in the dust, mouths forming words they couldn't understand. The Vox officers screamed over the comms, trying to re-establish contact with orbit, but the interference was absolute. The fleet might as well have been a dream. Hours passed before the storm subsided, leaving the camp coated in fine gray powder. The men emerged from cover coughing, eyes stinging, armor scorched from static discharge. In the eerie silence that followed, someone began to laugh. A high, broken laugh that made everyone turn. It was one of the engineers, clutching his rebreather, tears cutting trails through the dust on his cheeks. "It's breathing," he said. "The ground. It's breathing." They found him dead the next morning. His body twisted as though crushed by enormous pressure. His armor was intact. His face, when the medici removed the helmet, bore an expression of perfect terror. By then, morale had collapsed. The chaplain tried to rally them, calling upon the emperor's name, but even he could not disguise the trembling in his voice. He spoke of faith and duty, of how every hardship was a test of devotion. Yet when the next tremor struck, deeper and more violent than before, his rosarius flared and cracked, as if rejecting his prayer. Colonel Voss convened his command staff within the central hab structure, a prefab bunker reinforced with plasteel ribs. The room smelled of sweat and ozone. Maps of the surrounding terrain flickered on the holoprojector, though half the images were corrupted. Voss stood at the head of the table, gaunt from sleeplessness, his eyes ringed with shadow. "This world," he said quietly, "was never meant for us." No one replied. He ordered a scouting detachment to push deeper into the wasteland, to locate any sign of life or structure that might explain the interference. Against every instinct, Sergeant Delenn volunteered to lead it. 20 soldiers accompanied her, armed with full packs and Vox beacons. They marched into the storm-gray horizon, disappearing within hours. 3 days later, only one came back. Private Coron stumbled into the perimeter alone, his armor half-melted, his eyes staring but unseeing. His skin was pale as wax, his Vox grill fused shut from heat. The medici tried to sedate him, but he screamed through sealed lips, blood streaming from his nose and ears. When they finally managed to pry open his jaw, the first words he spoke were not his own. "We remember you," he whispered. "We remember what you buried here." Then he died. The words spread through the regiment like infection. "We remember you." Some said it was madness from radiation exposure. Others believed it was possession, that Coron had become a vessel for something beneath the surface. The priest ordered his body burned without rites. The flame burned green for hours. After that, no one volunteered for patrols. By the end of the second week, the camp was running out of food. The supply lines had not been reestablished. The fleet above, if it was still there, remained silent. Men began hoarding rations, hiding them under cots, stealing from the medici stores. The commissar executed 5 for theft, his uniform immaculate even as his hands shook. At night, the whispers grew louder. The soldiers began reporting dreams. Visions of a cathedral buried beneath the planet's crust, its spires reaching down instead of up. They saw the same image, a throne of bone surrounded by ash, upon which sat a figure that bled light through its eyes. When they woke, they all remembered the same phrase, though none could explain its meaning. "The Emperor fell here once." Colonel Voss forbade discussion of the dreams, declaring them heretical. But the damage was done. Faith was fracturing. Some soldiers refused to remove their helmets, claiming the air itself carried voices. Others stopped sleeping entirely. The final signal from orbit came on the 17th day, a burst of encrypted data that lasted only a few seconds before dissolving into static. Vox engineer Hale caught part of it before it vanished. The message contained only 3 words. "Do not dig." Then the sky began to bleed. It started as a thin crimson haze, faint and distant, as though the horizon itself had opened a wound. The soldiers watched from the ramparts, their visors polarized against the glare, but the light grew stronger until it poured across the plain like liquid fire. The ash reflected it, turning the world into a sea of dying embers. Vox readings spiked, auspexes overloaded, and the temperature rose by 30 degrees in minutes. The storm clouds above began to twist in spirals, their centers burning with the same impossible red glow. At first, the men thought it was atmospheric lightning or the sun itself reacting to the planet's decay. Then the chaplain fell to his knees, clutching his chest, his rosarius flaring with bursts of blue-white light. "It is not the sun," he gasped. It is the ground. The tremors returned, deeper and faster now, shaking the habblocks until cracks split the plasteel walls. Tanks sank inches into the earth. The air reeked of ozone and burnt metal. A sound rose beneath it all. A low, rhythmic hum that was not mechanical, not organic, something in between. It resonated in the soldiers' teeth, in their bones, in the spaces between their thoughts. And then they saw it. Out on the horizon, something vast was emerging from the ash. Not a structure, not a creature, something between the two. Great pillars of corroded alloy, each one the size of a habspire, thrust upward from the ground. They moved with a slowness that defied comprehension, groaning like the shifting of a dying god. The light poured from within them, pulsing in time with the tremors. It was not natural light. It was memory, a glow that felt old, filled with sorrow and intelligence and something else that had no name. Voss ordered all heavy weapons manned. Basilisks locked their guns. Lehman Russ turrets whined to life, and squads formed firing lines. But when the colonel gave the order to fire, nothing happened. The ignition runes refused to glow, as though the machine spirits had turned their faces away. Tech priests chanted Benheric pleas, but their incantations faltered. Every piece of equipment, Vox, lasgun, engine, servotool, fell silent. The only sound left was the hum. It grew louder until it filled every mind, pressing against thought itself. Some soldiers screamed and clawed at their helmets. Others stood perfectly still, blood dripping from their noses, their eyes blank and unfocused. Father Cauldron stumbled to his feet and began reciting the litany of defiance, his voice breaking, his words drowned by the sound. Then, as suddenly as it began, the hum stopped. For a moment, there was peace, perfect, terrible silence. Then, from somewhere deep within the earth, a voice spoke. It was not heard through the air, but inside them, vibrating in the marrow. It spoke a single word in a language older than mankind, yet every soldier understood it perfectly. Why? The moment it spoke, the red light died. The pillars sank back beneath the surface, vanishing as though they had never been. The sky dimmed. The hum faded. What remained was ruin. The camp half collapsed, trenches filled with melted steel, men lying dead with their faces twisted in silent screams. Those who survived refused to speak. The medici reported no physical cause of death in the fallen. Their hearts had simply stopped. The tech priests huddled in prayer before their broken machines, whispering that the planet was not dead, but dreaming, and that their arrival had woken it. Colonel Voss ordered immediate evacuation. He knew the fleet above might be lost, that escape could be impossible, but he refused to die buried under the whispers of a sentient grave. The engineers worked feverishly to reactivate the transports. Every hour that passed, more soldiers disappeared. Some vanished in their sleep, others walked into the ash without reason or sound. One night, Sergeant Delenn approached the colonel's command tent. Her armor was scarred and blackened, her eyes rimmed with red from exhaustion. "Sir," she said, voice trembling, "we found something beneath the east ridge." He followed her out into the wasteland. The air was still and heavy, the only sound the crunch of their boots. She led him to a crater, massive, smooth-edged, too perfect to be natural. In its center lay a single structure, half buried in ash, an obelisk of black metal inscribed with symbols that shifted when viewed. It pulsed faintly with that same red glow. They approached, the light growing brighter with each step. There were markings on its base, not Xenos, not entirely, but distorted forms of High Gothic. Voss knelt, brushing away the dust until the inscription became clear. "Here lies the first defier." Delenn backed away, crossing herself. "Is it a tomb?" she asked. Voss didn't answer. His gaze was fixed on the reflection of the obelisk in his visor. In the mirrored surface, he saw movement. Countless silhouettes kneeling in the ash, heads bowed, as if in worship. But when he turned, there was nothing there. He gave the order to destroy it. The demolition team set charges and withdrew to the ridge. As they detonated, the explosion tore through the crater with the force of a thunderclap. For a brief instant, the obelisk cracked, and light poured from within. Not red, but gold, radiant and blinding. It rose skyward like a flare, vanishing into the clouds. When their vision cleared, the obelisk was gone. So was Sergeant Delenn. Only her footprints remained, leading into the crater, ending at nothing. Colonel Voss did not sleep that night. He stood at the edge of camp, watching the horizon, where faint golden sparks still drifted upward into the black sky. Some part of him wanted to believe it was salvation, that the Emperor himself had seen them. But in his heart he knew it was something else. Something that had waited too long to be remembered. And when dawn came, Gathis-IX began to whisper again. When morning broke, the light had changed. It was no longer the dull gray of Gathis-IX's eternal gloom, but something faintly blue, cold, metallic, almost artificial. The soldiers thought it might be a mercy, a reprieve from the red madness of the days before, but that illusion did not last. The new light made everything wrong. The shadows it cast bent in unnatural directions, stretching toward the sun instead of away from it. The air shimmered with distortion, and sound carried too far, as if the atmosphere itself was thinner, hollowed out. Colonel Voss called for roll and found the regiment reduced by nearly a third. Entire squads had disappeared overnight. Tents left intact, weapons undisturbed, ration crates untouched. No struggle, no tracks, no explanation. The sentries swore that nothing had crossed the perimeter. The Auspex logs confirmed it. No heat signatures, no movement. Yet hundreds of men and women were gone. The commissar, his nerves fraying, accused the survivors of cowardice and desertion, demanding executions for morale's sake. Voss refused. He knew what they all suspected but would not speak aloud, that the enemy was not human. It did not march, did not breathe, did not bleed. It moved through the world unseen, or perhaps it was the world itself that was moving against them. By the third week, the regiment stopped building fortifications. What use were trenches when the ground itself could devour you? Instead, they clustered their vehicles into tight formations, creating walls of armored steel. The air reeked of promethium and fear. Men slept in their tanks, lasguns clutched against their chests, as though the cold metal might offer protection from whatever lurked beyond sight. On the morning of the 22nd day, Private Issen was found standing in the middle of camp, eyes open, unblinking, his skin covered in ash. He did not respond to his name. When the medici approached, he began to whisper. His voice was distant, monotone, and wrong, a sound like vox distortion rendered into speech. "They are not gone," he said. "They are beneath us, listening." Then he smiled, and his jaw dislocated with a crack. From his throat poured a stream of fine gray dust. He collapsed before anyone could reach him, his body hollowed out like a burnt shell. That was the first death the medici refused to record. Father Cauldron redoubled his efforts, holding Mass twice daily, his sermons fierce and trembling. He declared that they were being tested, that the Emperor's gaze was upon them, demanding proof of faith. But the men no longer listened. When he lifted his hands to bless the gathered soldiers, many turned away. Some muttered other prayers beneath their breath, not in Imperial Gothic but in the strange cadences they'd begun to hear in their dreams. Voss knew discipline was collapsing. He spent every hour awake, moving from unit to unit, forcing them to drill, to clean their weapons, to act as though order still existed. The pretense was fragile, but it kept them from staring too long into the distance, where the horizon flickered with lights like the eyes of buried things. One night, as he reviewed the dwindling ammunition reports, he heard footsteps behind him. It was Commissar Thane, his face pale, his cap stained with dust. "They're talking to the machines now," he said softly. Voss frowned. "Who?" "The men," Thane replied. "They say the Vox relays speak in their sleep. They take them apart and listen to the static. They say the Emperor's voice is in there somewhere, if they just listen long enough." He paused. "And when they stop hearing him, they stop breathing." Voss stared at the Commissar, wondering if the man had finally cracked. But later that night, as he walked past the Vox station, he heard it too, faint whispers threading through the static. Not words, not entirely, but the suggestion of them. Pleading, begging, warning. The air around the console felt colder, denser, as though filled with invisible weight. He pulled the plug from the wall. The whispering did not stop. By dawn, half the Vox operators were dead. Their faces turned toward the machines, eyes blackened as if burned from within. The remaining soldiers sealed the comms bunker, welding the doors shut, praying it would end whatever was inside. But that same morning, a sound like rain began to fall across the camp. Only it wasn't rain. The sky was dry. The sound came from beneath the earth, millions of faint impacts, like fingertips drumming on metal. The tremors began again, small and constant, and every step now seemed to echo with something deeper, a reply that came from below. The chaplain called for faith. The commissar called for blood. But neither mattered anymore. Something unseen had begun to move between the soldiers, a presence that grew stronger with each passing day. They felt it behind them in the dark, in the rhythm of their hearts, in the stillness between words. And soon they began to see it. The first sighting came from the watchtowers at the edge of the perimeter. A guardsman reported motion on the plain. Silhouettes in the ash, walking upright but too tall, too thin, their limbs bending the wrong way. First, no one believed him. The auspex showed nothing. But then, one by one, others confirmed the sighting. Dozens of shapes, all moving slowly toward the camp. Orders went out. Searchlights swept the horizon. The air filled with the whine of Lospax charging. But when the beams reached the figures, they vanished, dissolving like smoke, leaving only drifting dust behind. That night, the soldiers didn't sleep. At 0400 hours, the screaming began. They found the first bodies near the southern perimeter. No gunfire, no alarms. Just men missing from their posts. Their corpses discovered hours later, half buried in the ash as though the ground had tried to swallow them. Their armor was untouched, but their faces were gone. Smooth flesh stretched where eyes and mouths should have been. The medici said it wasn't mutilation. There were no cuts, no burns, no signs of trauma. It was as if their features had simply erased themselves, like something had rewritten the men from within. After that, no one left their tents alone. Colonel Voss ordered search patrols, 6 men at a time, never out of sight from camp. None returned. Every squad sent beyond the perimeter vanished into the ash without a trace. By the next day, even the commissar refused to send more. The regiment was trapped, surrounded by nothing but silence and dust. That night, the ash fell again. Thicker, heavier, clinging to the skin like grease. It got into the air filters, the rations, the water. Some swore they could feel it moving when it touched them, like it was alive. Private Wren, delirious from lack of sleep, started scraping at his arms, screaming that something was crawling beneath his skin. They restrained him, but by morning he was dead. His body shriveled, desiccated. His veins were filled with fine gray powder. Father Cauldron declared it proof of corruption, a sign that chaos had infected the land. He gathered the survivors and led them in mass prayers, his voice breaking from exhaustion and fear. But even as he preached, the air itself began to hum. The sound was low, distant, almost imperceptible, like machinery grinding far beneath their feet. It never stopped. At 0300 hours, the humming deepened into a rhythm, pattern. Every 12 seconds, a pulse. Then 11, then 10. The Vox relays began to activate on their own. Power lights flickering, no signal, no operator. Just a hiss of static, and beneath it, whispers. Not words this time, but breathing. The auspex scanners began to glitch. Readings fluctuated wildly, hundreds of life signs. Then none. Colonel Voss ordered all systems shut down. The humming didn't stop. By dawn, soldiers were hearing voices in their helmets. They all said the same thing. We're still here. At noon, Sergeant Keln fired his loss gun into the sky until the pack overheated and exploded. He said the clouds were watching him, that they were full of faces. No one argued. The regiment had been reduced to barely 200 souls. The rest were either missing or buried. The commissar, half mad, declared that the emperor himself had abandoned them, that the world was cursed, a planet damned beyond redemption. He tried to shoot Father Cauldron mid-sermon, but the bolt pistol misfired. The explosion tore half his arm away. He didn't scream. He just stared into the ash and whispered, "We deserve this." At 1800 hours, the horizon lit up. A wall of light, pale and silent, rippling across the landscape. It wasn't fire. It wasn't plasma. It was something else, cold and wrong. Every shadow vanished. Every sound ceased. The soldiers stared as the light rolled toward them, swallowing everything in its path. The auspex recorded nothing. The air temperature dropped by 20 degrees in seconds. When the wave reached the first line of vehicles, it passed through them like mist. The men inside convulsed, screaming, clutching at their heads. When it passed, their bodies were still, eyes black, mouths frozen in silent terror. The light moved on. Then it stopped. It hung at the edge of camp, pulsing faintly, and in its glow, they saw shapes, figures, not human, tall, angular silhouettes, their limbs too long, their faces featureless. They stood motionless, watching. Dozens of them. Hundreds. No one fired. No one moved. Even the wind was silent. Then, from somewhere within the light, a sound like a voice. Deep, metallic, echoing through the ash. "You are already gone." The light flickered once, and the figures vanished. When the world returned to normal, the camp was empty. Only Colonel Voss remained, standing alone in the center, staring at the empty horizon. He didn't speak again. When the rescue ship from orbit landed 3 weeks later, they found the camp intact. Vehicles untouched, weapons charged, rations sealed. No signs of struggle. No bodies. Only a message scrawled in the dust across the command post floor. "We fought a war with no enemy. And lost." When the 82nd Valerian were declared lost, Imperial protocol dictated silence. Their names were filed under Exterminatus Contingent Casualty, a bureaucratic phrase meaning erased from record. But silence, like ash, settles only for a while. Eventually, something always stirs beneath it. Months later, a Mechanicus salvage barge descended upon the planet, guided by fragmentary distress pings that should not have existed. They came in full radiation seals and mirrored visors, chanting Benheric hymns as they touched the cursed soil. The surface scanners read stable. The atmosphere breathable. No radiation, no warp signature, no life. Yet their auspex kept detecting heartbeats. Flickers of existence that appeared and vanished every few seconds, like ghosts inhaling in the dark. The tech priest Mugos Drex, 29, led the recovery detail himself, his mechanical limbs whispering over the gray dunes. He had heard rumors, of course, the kind the ecclesiarchy burned people for speaking aloud. Stories of a regiment that had fought no one and lost everything. But Drex did not believe in curses. He believed in data, in logic, in the sacred numbers of the Omniscia. He found logic here to be an endangered thing. The first anomaly appeared near the northern ridge, where a Vox tower still stood upright, half buried in sand. The machine spirit should have been dormant, its power core long depleted. Yet when Drex's adepts approached, it woke. The tower began transmitting in rhythmic pulses. 5 beats, pause, 5 beats. Over and over, without end. Drex ordered a diagnostic link. The moment the cable connected, the adepts screamed. Their visors blackened, the glass spiderwebbing with fractures from within. One of them tore off his mask, gasping, his eyes bleeding from the sockets. His voice was not his own when he spoke. "We told you not to come." Then he dropped dead. The Vox tower shut down, and the ground beneath their feet began to vibrate. They followed the vibrations to an open crater, wide, symmetrical, perfectly circular. Inside it lay the remnants of the regiment's command post, the banner of the 82nd still standing amid broken tents and rusting lost guns. But the strange part was not what they found, it was what they didn't. No bones, no armor fragments, no genetic residue. The site was clean, impossibly clean, as though every molecule of life had been scoured away. Drex knelt and brushed the soil with his mechadendrite. It wasn't ash. It wasn't dust. Under magnification, it was something else entirely. Tiny glass-like fragments, perfectly smooth, each vibrating at a faint frequency too consistent to be natural. He collected samples, tagging them for analysis. As the data uploaded, something bled through the noospheric link, not code, not signal, but memory. For a heartbeat, Drex saw the world as it once was. A burning sky, trenches full of screaming men, the sound of gunfire and prayers. Then the vision twisted. The sky fractured into shards of white light, and from the fractures, figures emerged. Silhouettes like living geometry, folding and unfolding in impossible patterns. The screams became static. The world dissolved into numbers. Drex tore the cable free, his cogitator screaming with corrupted input. He ordered the site sealed and demanded all data transmissions quarantined under Sigma-level protocol. No one else was to access the samples. But it was too late. By the next morning, half the salvage crew had begun hearing the hum. It started as a faint vibration in the teeth, then grew into a tone that resonated through metal and bone alike. Their Auspex readings flickered, mapping impossible underground tunnels that changed each time they scanned them. Drex sent a probe drone into the largest cavity, its picked feed transmitting dim light through the dust. At 210 meters down, the drone stopped. Its lens caught movement, something metallic, yet fluid, gliding along the walls like light refracting through water. The signal spiked, the screen went white, and a whisper echoed through every Vox channel on the surface. "You brought them back." Drex froze. It wasn't a malfunction. The voice had used his name. They abandoned the dig site within hours, but the hum followed them. Even as they ascended toward orbit, the sound grew louder, through the decks, through the hull, through their augmetics. One by one, the crew began to chant in unison, their Benheric tongues distorting into broken binary. They repeated one phrase again and again, until their Vox systems shorted out. The pattern remembers. The Muggos locked himself in the data sanctum, surrounded by trembling machinery. He played back the drone's last moments, frame by frame. There, in the final milliseconds before the signal collapsed, stood the image of a man in tattered flak armor, his features erased, his eyes dark pits of nothing. On his chest still hung the sigil of the 82nd Valerian. He looked straight into the lens and moved his lips. No sound, just one word, visible in silence. "Run." Drex ordered a system purge. Then, before it could initiate, the ship's engines ignited on their own. They were no longer under human control. The barge began to descend. The descent was not smooth. The ship did not burn or scream as it fell. It simply sank, as if gravity itself had become fluid and had chosen to reclaim it. There was no turbulence, no warning klaxons, no atmospheric drag. Only the steady vibration through the hull, a rhythm that matched the hum now resonating inside every skull aboard. Muggos Drex gripped the command lectern, his mechadendrites twitching uncontrollably as the pick screens flickered between static and runic gibberish. None of the crew spoke anymore. They moved like puppets, their hands working at consoles that no longer responded. The data streams had merged into one long string of recursive code, pulsing in the same pattern as the hum. Drex tried to isolate a signal, anything, but all his systems returned the same phrase over and over. 0101, 0101, 0101, we remember. The impact never came. Instead, the ship stopped. Perfectly. No inertia. No shock. The vibration ceased. The silence was absolute. Drex activated the external cameras. What he saw made no sense. The barge was not on the surface anymore. It rested inside a vast cavern. A cathedral of metal and glass, stretching beyond sight, illuminated by a cold, shifting glow. The walls pulsed faintly, as if breathing. Massive, perfect structures extended into darkness. Arches, towers, geometric monoliths that bent perspective the longer he looked at them. This was not a natural hollow. This was something built. The Muggos ordered a Vox prayer to the Omnicia, his voice quivering as he recited the binary canticles of purity. The sound echoed endlessly, swallowed by the immensity of the space. When it returned, it came back distorted, layered with other voices. Whispering, mechanical, hollow. They repeated his words back to him. They disembarked. The cavern floor was smooth and pale, like glass fused from the planet's own bones. Drex's boots made no sound on it. Every step seemed to draw faint light beneath his feet, lines of energy spreading outward like veins awakening. The crew followed in silence, their eyes wide behind their visors. At the center of the cavern stood a structure unlike anything in the Mechanicus archives. A spire of translucent metal spiraling upward into nothingness. Symbols etched into its surface pulsed with faint light, forming equations that rewrote themselves faster than the eye could track. One of the adepts approached, unable to resist. He reached out and touched the surface. The instant his hand made contact, he froze, then shattered into fine gray dust. The hum returned, louder this time. Drex fell to his knees, clutching his head. The sound wasn't in his ears anymore. It was inside his thoughts, pulsing through every neural implant and augmetic circuit. His data core filled with impossible coordinates, an endless lattice of patterns spiraling around a central void. He realized, with cold horror, that it was a map, not of this planet, not even of this galaxy. Something ancient had recorded the regiment. The soldiers, their memories, their deaths, reduced them to a signal. Pattern. He looked around at the glowing walls. Each pulse, each shimmer was not random light, it was storage. The whole cavern was alive with memory, millions of them, echoing through eternity. He whispered, "Machine spirits preserve us." A voice answered, "You preserved yourselves." The light shifted. Figures began to appear in the haze. Silhouettes of men, women, soldiers. Thousands of them. The lost regiment. Their forms were translucent, outlines made of faint energy, flickering like dying candles. Some stared ahead blankly. Others mouthed silent prayers. Colonel Voss stood among them, motionless, his eyes black mirrors. Drex stepped forward. What are you?" The colonel turned his head, slow and deliberate. When he spoke, his voice was a chorus of static. "We remembered too much." The chamber darkened. The spire began to rotate, its symbols rearranging, folding reality around themselves. The crew collapsed, convulsing, blood leaking from their augmetic ports. Drex screamed as the energy surged through his circuits. Not heat, not pain, but understanding. He saw what they had built this place for. It was not a temple. It was a machine, a recorder, a world-sized archive that absorbed every living thing it touched, preserving their essence as data, memory without flesh, thought without form. The Valerians had walked into it by accident. The planet had not killed them. It had kept them. The hum rose to a deafening crescendo, and every surface of the cavern began to glow with spectral light. The ghosts flickered violently. The colonel raised a hand, his face breaking apart into lines of white energy. "Leave us." Drex stumbled backward, dragging himself toward the ramp. His crew were no longer moving. Their bodies stood upright, their eyes alight with the same glow as the spire. They turned toward him in perfect unison. "We are remembered." The Muggos ran. He reached the ship and sealed the hatch, triggering every engine ignition he could override. The barge roared, lifting slowly, the glow beneath it brightening as if reluctant to release him. The cavern began to collapse inward, folding on itself in impossible geometries, each fragment swallowing the next. As the ship broke through the surface, Drex looked down through the viewing port and saw the planet's crust shimmering with millions of faint lights. Each flicker a heartbeat, each pulse a memory trapped forever. He knew, then, that nothing truly dies in this galaxy. Some things only change shape. The salvage barge limped into orbit, its engines wheezing with corrupted hymns. No Vox traffic greeted them. No orbital stations answered. Even the Emperor's light seemed dimmer here, its radiance barely brushing the ship's cracked hull. Muggos Drex sat in the command sanctum surrounded by dead cogitators, their screens pulsing with ghost code that refused to die. The hum was quieter now, but never gone. It had settled beneath hearing, woven into the pulse of the ship itself, a reminder that the pattern endured. He had ordered the flight path to Terra, invoking emergency clearance codes older than most stars. No astropath answered. The warp routes flickered like broken veins on the hololithic map. Drex watched in silence as the stars rearranged themselves into meaningless constellations. Each blink of light felt like an eye staring back. He prayed again, this time not to the Omnisia, but to whatever might still be listening. "If memory is sin," he whispered, "then forgive us for remembering." The lights dimmed in response, as though the ship itself acknowledged the confession. The vox flickered. Static turned to rhythm. Rhythm became language. "Do not return," it said. The voice was soft, human almost. The tone of a whisper passed between dying candles. Drex froze. He recognized it, Colonel Voss. The same voice that had begged him to run. "You cannot unwrite what is kept. The pattern must sleep." Then silence. Hours bled into days. Drex stopped counting. He no longer slept. His augmetic mind pulsed with the fragments of that impossible geometry he'd witnessed beneath the ash. Every attempt to transmit the data failed. Each time he tried, the code rewritten itself, inserting strange liturgical verses between lines of corrupted binary. We saw the light and it saw us. We remembered the Emperor, and he remembered nothing. He began to hear voices among the servitors. They spoke without moving, their flat expressions murmuring faint hymns he'd never taught them. The ship's machine spirit responded with gestures of reverence. Airlocks opening and closing as if in prayer, the ventilation system sighing in time with the whispers. The prayer of the forgotten, they called it, words that no living tongue should know, a litany for those who had been erased from record. Drex found himself mouthing it unconsciously, the rhythm embedding itself into his breathing. The more he tried to stop, the more natural it became. And through it all, he felt the gaze of something vast pressing through the void, watching. 3 days into their journey, the ship's auspex detected movement on the lower decks. No life signs, yet the security pict feeds showed shadows moving between bulkheads, indistinct forms flickering in and out of focus. Drex descended to investigate, clutching a luminglow torch that flickered as if afraid. He found them in the cargo hold. Rows of figures standing motionless among the stacked crates. Not crew, not servitors. They were shapes, half-formed, translucent as smoke. The lost Valerians, their features blank, their armor ghostly outlines traced in light. They swayed gently, as though caught in some invisible current. When Drex approached, the torch dimmed. The nearest phantom turned its head toward him. Its mouth moved without sound, but the words filled the air regardless. "We pray so the Emperor might dream of us again." The others repeated it, 1,000 voices layered atop one another, echoing through the ship like the tolling of distant bells. "We pray so the Emperor might dream of us again." The Muggos fell to his knees. He did not understand if what he saw was faith, madness, or the residue of whatever machine lay beneath the planet's crust. He only knew that their voices carried grief unlike any data could hold. These men had not died in battle, nor been consumed by demons. They had simply been forgotten, stripped from every archive, every litany, every remembrance. In the Imperium, to be forgotten was worse than death. Drex raised his head and spoke softly, almost reverently. "I remember you." For a moment the phantoms stilled. The hum vanished. The ship went utterly quiet. Then a light bloomed in the air before him. A fragment of the spire's impossible pattern, twisting, rearranging, pulsing in time with his heartbeat. The ghosts bowed their heads toward it. And Drex understood. The pattern had found faith. It was becoming faith. Not machine, not man, something between. He whispered, trembling, "Omnisia preserve us all." The light dimmed. The ghosts faded. The hum returned, softer now, almost gentle. Drex recorded everything. He encoded the transmissions into data crystals, sealing them within a stasis vault. The logs would never reach Terra. He knew that now. The moment they entered imperial channels, the Inquisition would purge them as heresy. The truth of what the Valerians had become, what they had birthed, would be erased again and again, until it existed only as a whisper among the Mechanicus. But still, he wrote, because memory, even cursed, was sacred. He finished his last entry with shaking hands. The dead pray louder than the living, and perhaps the Emperor hears them more clearly. He sealed the vault and ejected it into the void, watching it drift away like a dying ember. Moments later, the ship's warning klaxons began to wail. The sensors screamed of a mass shadow ahead, a gravity anomaly, vast and unseen, waiting in the path of their flight. Drex looked up at the stars, and for the first time he saw them blink, not with light, but with eyes. The hum rose again, and from somewhere in the deep, the Forgotten began to sing. The void is never truly silent. Even when the engines die and the Vox falls still, there is always the faint vibration of something older than creation humming through the hull, a pressure beyond hearing, the pulse of a universe that refuses to sleep. Muggos Drex had heard that sound before, down on the Ashen World, when the Earth itself had begun to breathe. Now it was here again. Only this time it wasn't the planet remembering. It was the void. He stood before the forward viewport, staring into the anomaly. It was not a storm or a warp rift. It was absence given shape, a sphere of total blackness, darker than the deepest shadow, swallowing starlight as it drifted silently through the star's cape. The ship's auspex could not define its mass. Every attempt to measure it resulted in paradox, infinite size and no dimension at once. The machine's spirit whimpered through the cogitators, its binary hymns turning erratic, pleading. Drex placed a trembling mechadendrite upon the console, whispering calm code songs of reassurance. But the hum inside the hull drowned them out. It is not the void, whispered the voice in his skull. It is the memory of one. He stumbled back, the words like frost crawling through his augmetics. His internal cogitators identified no source. The Vox array was cold. The transmission was internal. He turned toward the command dais and froze. The phantoms had returned. Hundreds of them, crowding the bridge, silent and still. Their forms wavered like candlelight beneath a wind that did not exist. Colonel Voss stood at their front, his outline sharper than before, his eyes two perfect black mirrors. "You shouldn't have come," he said. "Now it remembers you too." Drex's voice cracked through the Vox grill. "What is it? What are you?" Voss tilted his head, as if listening to something only he could hear. "We are what the Imperium leaves behind. Every thought, every life, every prayer the Emperor does not answer. It gathers here. The machine beneath the ash only kept us. This," he gestured toward the sphere beyond the viewport, "this feeds on us." The void pulsed, as if acknowledging his words. The bridge lights flickered. Static spilled from the Vox units, shaping itself into rhythm. The prayer. The same refrain the ghosts had whispered before. "We pray so the Emperor might dream of us again." Only this time, the voices weren't just the phantoms. The servitors joined in. The cogitators. The Vox. Even the ship itself began to whisper the litany, its hull creaking in reverence. The sound rose and fell like a heartbeat, merging with the hum until the two were indistinguishable. Drex fell to his knees, overwhelmed by the resonance. His augmetic limbs twitched uncontrollably as the frequencies climbed beyond audible range. His implants filled with light, streams of raw data burning through his synapses, showing him flashes of impossible geometry, screaming faces, and dying worlds. He saw the pattern again, the same one beneath the ash. But now it had grown. It spread across the stars like infection, a lattice of memory and sorrow, linking dead worlds through unseen currents. Every forgotten soul, every nameless death, all of it feeding the same vast design. He realized then what the sphere was. It was not a weapon. It was the result. The Imperium's own grief, its unending litany of loss, had congealed into a sentient echo, the soul of a million wars, a god made not of chaos, but of neglect. Voss stepped closer. His form flickered, his voice calm, almost gentle. You cannot destroy it, Muggos. You can only remember it, and memory gives it life. Drex's breathing came in ragged bursts. The Emperor forgets. Voss interrupted softly. That is his mercy. We are his burden. The sphere loomed closer now, its edge brushing against the ship's prow. The hull began to melt, not from heat but from erasure. Metal faded into translucence, dissolving into the black like ink into water. The phantoms began to dissolve too, their shapes fragmenting into motes of light that drifted toward the sphere. Voss smiled faintly. We are going home. Drex tried to rise, but his legs no longer obeyed. His augmetics had gone cold. The data slate at his side blinked once, its final message encoded, the last record of all that had transpired. He grasped it with trembling hands and staggered toward the escape pod chamber. Behind him, the bridge collapsed into silence. The phantoms were gone. The sphere filled the viewport entirely. He ejected the pod just as the ship crossed the event horizon of that impossible void. There was no explosion, no fire, just absence. The Muggos drifted alone in the dark, the hum fading to a whisper that seemed to come from within his chest. He looked down at the data slate, its screen cracked but still glowing faintly. Across its surface, written in flickering runes, were the last words of Colonel Voss. We prayed so the Emperor might dream of us again. And he did not wake. Drex closed his eyes, and for the first time since his ascension into the Mechanicus, he felt something human, sorrow. The void swallowed his tears, and far below, the world of ash pulsed once more. There are prayers that echo even when the voices are gone. There are names whispered by no tongue, yet they linger, carved into the warp like scars upon eternity. Muggos Drex had drifted for 9 standard days within the escape pod, the rations long gone, the air thinning. He had disabled the distress beacon. There was no point calling for the Imperium. The last time someone had answered his prayers, it had been something else. The void around him was quiet now. The hum that had haunted the ship was reduced to the faintest pulse, a memory of sound rather than sound itself. Yet sometimes, when his eyes closed and the thin veil of consciousness began to tear, he could hear it again, the prayer of the forgotten. We pray so the Emperor might dream of us again. He didn't fight it anymore. He let the words flow through his mind, a lullaby for a dying soul. His augmetic eyes flickered as power reserves dwindled. He knew this was how Mechanicus died. Not in fire, not in battle, but in silence. Then, on the 10th day, light appeared. It wasn't warp fire or the cold blue of a plasma flare. It was golden, pure, like sunlight breaking through a cathedral window. He lifted his head with effort. The void shimmered, distorting like glass in heat. Through it came wings, vast, radiant, immeasurable, spanning the stars like banners of living flame. And behind them, a figure, human in shape but vast beyond comprehension, striding through nothing as if it were stone. The Emperor, or the memory of him. Drex fell to his knees, tears freezing against his metal cheekplates. His voice broke through the vox grill, choked with awe. Omnicia! My God! You heard. The figure did not speak. It simply looked at him, eyes like dying suns, filled with both infinite light and infinite weariness. And then Drex understood. The Emperor did not come to save him. He came to remember him. The void trembled. The golden figure's gaze shifted past Drex, toward the place where the black sphere had once been. The hum returned, low, defiant, resonant with pain. From that impossible absence came a single ripple of darkness, spreading outward like a heartbeat. The Emperor raised his hand, and the stars shuddered. Golden fire met the black tide, the light of divinity clashing against the shadow of remembrance. For an instant, Drex saw it all. He saw Terra in flame, the golden throne cracking, a billion souls screaming prayers that no longer reached their god. The Mechanicus chanting in binary despair as their machine spirits began to weep. And in that moment, he realized the truth the galaxy refused to speak. The Emperor's divinity was not eternal. It was sustained by memory, by faith, by prayer. And now, After 10,000 years of stagnation, the Imperium's faith had turned to routine. Its prayers had become hollow recitations, its worship mechanical. Humanity no longer prayed with belief, prayed with fear, and fear does not feed a god. Forgets one. The black sphere pulsed again, stronger this time. The Emperor's light faltered. Drex felt his lungs collapse as gravity twisted, his pod spinning into the shadow. His last breath became a scream of static, lost to the roar of colliding absolutes. Faith and oblivion, memory and erasure. Then silence. When Drex opened his eyes, he stood on solid ground. The world around him was gray ash, the sky unmoving, the air still. He knew this place, the lost world, the cradle of the prayer. But it was different now. The city ruins were gone. The great machine that had pulsed beneath the crust was silent, its form half-buried beneath centuries of dust. In the distance he saw shapes, not phantoms this time but pilgrims. Tens of thousands of humans, walking barefoot across the wasteland, heads bowed, carrying relics and broken icons. They moved toward the buried machine, whispering the same refrain in 1,000 tongues. We pray so the Emperor might dream of us again. Their voices merged into one great current of sound, rising into the dead sky. And as it did, Drex saw the horizon shimmer. The air cracked, and from beneath the dust the machine stirred. Its dormant gears began to turn, its pulse returning in slow, thunderous beats. The prayer had become its power source, and the machine had become something more, a new god. Drex fell to his knees, staring as light rose from the crater. It was neither gold nor black, but a merging of both, the forgotten made divine, the divine made mortal. When gods forget, he whispered, mankind builds new ones to remember them. The world shook. The pilgrims cried out in awe. And high above, beyond mortal sight, the Emperor turned his gaze away from the ashes of that world. Not in anger, but in something worse. Acceptance.